Alright, this is our second video on pragmatics, La Pragmática 2. I'm actually going to be doing this video in English for a couple of reasons. First, because the conceptual material is really difficult, but second, because most of the terminology is in English and it's kind of difficult to manage going back and forth with that terminology. So let's go ahead and look at the second lesson of pragmatics. So let's remember very quickly what a context set is, and let's take these circles to represent the propositions believed by the participants in a conversation. Remember, this is not necessarily an accurate collection. It represents those propositions that a given speaker believes the other participant or participants believe or believes. So our context set is when all of these propositions intersect, all of these sets of possible worlds intersect, and the context set represents the set of possible worlds that could be the real world given the propositions that we share with our interlocutors. So when we look into this context set, it's really a set of possible worlds. We need to remember that. And this is when you're having a conversation with somebody, the set of possibilities that could really represent how the world is. So today we're going to learn about questions under discussion, QUDs, and a question under discussion divides the context set, that set of possible worlds that could be the real world, into sets of possibilities. So when we exchange information, that is when we assert information, we are responding to a QUD. Before in the last video I said that assertions should be relevant, and this is what I mean when I say assertions should be relevant. They're responding to a question that's under discussion. So if I assert that my name is James, it only makes sense if there's a QUD that is dividing the context set into sets of possible worlds where one of these sets is a set of possible worlds where my name is James, another is a set of possible worlds where my name is Bill, my name is Christopher, my name is Jack, etc. When I make the assertion that my name is James, I eliminate from the context set all of the possible worlds in which my name isn't James. So this is what we already said about the context set. When I add a proposition, when I assert a proposition, it makes the context set smaller. And the way that it makes the context set smaller is it eliminates all of those other options, all of those other possibilities given the question under discussion. So let's look at a conceptual example of that. So let's say that this is a context set in a conversation between me and a stranger. So there's quite a bit of information that the stranger and I don't have that overlaps. So let's say that the question under discussion is, what's your name? And then we have these different possible, these different divisions. This is the set of possible worlds that represents the worlds in which my name is James. This represents the set of possible worlds in which my name is Hercules, and this represents the possible worlds in which my name is Peter. Of course, there are more than 3 sets of possible worlds here, but I've just put 3 here to make it a little bit easier. And let's take a look in this set of possible worlds in which my name is James. For the sake of this conversation, because I'm having a conversation with a stranger, let's say in this world I'm a teacher, in this world I'm a doctor, in this world I'm a movie star. So these are sets of possible worlds that for all this stranger knows about me, there are a lot of ways that the actual world really could be once this stranger learns that my name is James. So there are a lot of possible worlds in this set of possible worlds, even though I've only drawn 5 here. So when I make the assertion, then to the question under discussion, the question under discussion has divided the context set into these different possibilities. When I make the assertion that my name is James, I'm adding this proposition to the context set. I am adding the proposition that the name of this individual, who happens to be me, is James, to the context set, and what that does is it makes a new context set, and that context set is smaller, like we saw in the last video. And it includes this set of possible worlds in which my name is James, and it also includes those worlds in which I'm a doctor and those worlds in which I'm a movie star, because this stranger doesn't have any other information to know what I do yet, until maybe it becomes a question under discussion, and then this new context set would be divided more. So questions under discussion are all of this what we have said. So that's why this conversation seems weird if person A says, how's it going? And person B says, my name is James. It just doesn't seem relevant. And the reason it doesn't seem relevant is there's no question under discussion that's dividing the context set up into worlds in which my name is James, worlds in which my name is Hercules, worlds in which my name is Peter, etc. And that's why we get an infelicitous statement there. So today we're going to learn about focus and what it has to do with questions under discussion. And focus is about questions under discussion. In general, when we have explicit questions under discussion, we respond only with the information that is relevant to eliminate the possible worlds that don't reflect the actual world. So when I'm saying an explicit question under discussion, I mean person A literally asks, "What's your name?" The question under discussion is, "What's your name?" And person A has said, "What's your name?" And when we have explicit questions under discussion, person B tends to respond with a single answer, a single word, James, or a small phrase that directly responds to that question under discussion, and will divide, well, the context set is divided, it will eliminate those possibilities in the context set very easily. That don't represent the real world. So, ¿cuántos años tienes? 25. Once again, in Spanish and in English, when the question under discussion is explicit, we get very quick one-word often answers. But questions under discussion can also be implied. That is, when they're implied, no one actually says them out loud, but we understand that the context set is divided into sets of possible worlds, into these different possibilities. So in this case, we focus the element that is the answer to the implicit QUD. Let's see how this might work. So if I say, my shirt is green, my shirt is green, my shirt is green, what would the questions under discussion be for each of these focused sentences? Each of these sentences with a focus element in there. I'm going to give you, you can take a couple minutes here and pause and try and figure it out, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next slide with the answers. So these sentences on their own sound pretty weird, but if I have the question under discussion, whose shirt is green? My shirt is green. Your what is green? My shirt is green. Your shirt is what color? My shirt is green. All of a sudden, once we have these questions under discussion here, this focus intonation sounds much more natural. So an easy way to figure out the question under discussion when we have a focused element is to replace that element with a question word. So my is a possessor, it's referring to a person, and so the question I can put here is whose, and then that represents my question under discussion. So what do I mean when I'm talking about implicit QUDs? Let's think of a context where the QUD is implicitly, your shirt is what color? This means that the utterance, my shirt is green, is felicitous. So here's our context. Two captains are picking out teams for kickball. One of them is colorblind and can't distinguish between blue and green. You are wearing a green shirt, and you happen to be very proud of the fact that your shirt is green. He points to you and says, you, with the blue shirt. He's selecting you for his team. You respond, my shirt is green. So compare this to, my shirt is green. Here, our implicit question under discussion is, your shirt is what color? And the reason that is our implicit QUD is because we have a mistake that's been made. The team captain has said the wrong color of your shirt, which he has then selected the wrong set of possible worlds. This set of possible worlds does not reflect the real world, and so you must correct the context set. You must correct the set of possible worlds that you believe to be accurate to the real world, and you do that by making this assertion, my shirt is green, which is presupposing that the question under discussion is, your shirt is what color? My shirt is green. Alright, so how does all of this apply to Spanish? We've seen a few optional elements along the way in this semester, and the questions under discussion help us with almost all of these optional elements. So note that when I say optional, we mean that all of the following sentences are grammatical, and both sentences in each pair have the same truth conditions. That's what I mean about optional. So, me llamo Tatiana versus yo me llamo Tatiana. Le dije hola versus a mi mamá le dije hola. Mi nombre es Enrique versus el nombre mío es Enrique. In the second sentence in this set of sentences, we have this extra optional element, yo a mi mamá, and then we have this variation between mi nombre and el nombre mío. So what's going on here? Why do we realize optional elements, and why do we have that possessive, that other possessive there? When we have a question under discussion whose response is a single element of a sentence, as we said, we want to focus that element. To focus something, and we do this to a greater extent in English, we put stress in the form of focus intonation on that element. So if you notice when I was going through those focus sentences, I have this pitch contour. My shirt is green. My shirt is green. My shirt is green. So I have this focus intonation that's kind of going up and down. That's stress. That's one form of stress on those elements. But there are certain elements in the Spanish language that either can't bear stress, or there are elements that tend not to bear stress. And these are verb endings, clitic pronouns, and posesivos átonos. So now we can finally realize why these different possessors are called posesivos átonos, which means they can't receive stress, and posesivos tónicos, which means they can receive stress. So the following sentences don't work. If the question under discussion is el nombre de quién es Enrique, if Enrique then says mi nombre es Enrique, because that possessor doesn't like to bear stress. ¿Quién se llama Tatiana? Me llamó Tatiana. Because we cannot stress verb endings. ¿A quién le dijiste hola? Le dije hola. We cannot stress clitic pronouns. So we might suppose that the speaker is trying to say this and emphatically pointing at someone while saying this. And this is actually something that English speakers who are learning Spanish tend to do, is they'll stress things like clitic pronouns, because that's how we do it in English. So, but we can't do that in English. We need to add that other element. A mi mamá le dije hola. So let's take a look at the question under discussion. ¿Quién se llama Tatiana? Let's first look at the explicit case, and we have the context. Let's suppose that in a certain high school, when an adult asks a teenager a question, it's polite for the teenager to respond with an entire sentence instead of a single word. And I'm just putting this to motivate why we would have an entire sentence response. And this isn't completely unrealistic. There are situations that are social situations that will motivate an entire sentence versus a one-word response. So the secretary of the high school gets a call from Tatiana's mother saying that, oops, that's a mistake, she needs to leave class early. The secretary walks... Sorry, I changed the gender of this person. The secretary walks to her classroom and does not know who she is, and then the secretary asks the class, ¿Quién se llama Tatiana? And Tatiana responds, Yo me llamo Tatiana. So here we have an explicit question under discussion, ¿Quién se llama Tatiana? Asked by the secretary to the room of students, and Tatiana then says, Yo me llamo Tatiana. Tatiana, of course, could have just said yo, but again, we have presupposed in this context that would be a little rude. Alright, so let's look at the implicit case. Tatiana and Patricia are identical twin sisters, and as a result, people confuse them often. They both attend an event in their school where everybody receives a name tag. The individual working the registration table knows them both, but not well enough to tell them apart. The individual hands Patricia the name tag that says Tatiana. Tatiana says, Yo me llamo Tatiana. So in this context, when the individual handed the wrong name to Patricia, it made the question under discussion, ¿Quién se llama Tatiana?, relevant, just like in the case of the team captain. So notice what's going on here is Tatiana is including the subject pronoun to be able to put focus intonation on that subject pronoun, because she can't say me llamó Tatiana. She can't stress a verb ending. So to illustrate this, we have when the individual handed the wrong name tag to Patricia, she automatically created this division in the context set. She created one set of the possible worlds in which the young woman who we know as Tatiana is named Tatiana, and then another set of possible worlds in which the young woman who we know as Tatiana's sister, who we all know as Patricia, is named Tatiana. Again, as far as this individual is concerned, this individual does not know who's who, and so we have this context set that is now, because of the name tag handing event, the context set has been divided into these possibilities. And the question under discussion is, ¿Quién se llama Tatiana? I've got these two individuals in front of me, and one of them either this one on the left, se llama Tatiana, or this one on the right, se llama Tatiana, but I don't know which one. And so I've divided my context set into these possibilities and handed the name tag. And that's why Tatiana responds with focus intonation. So focus in Spanish, if there is a relevant question under discussion whose answer is one of the elements of a sentence, we want to focus that element. If I want to focus the subject, I realize the subject pronoun. For example, yo me llamo Tatiana. If I want to focus the indirect object, I add the indirect, oops, that's a mistake, object phrase that begins with a, so I will always say, a mi mamá le dije hola. If I want to focus the possessor, I use the posesivo tónico. I use this other possessive form that can either be a pronoun or it can be an adjective. And for example, that would be el nombre mío es Enrique. So one last note, in Spanish, speakers don't rely on intonation to focus elements as much as we do in English, because they have these other grammatical elements in their sentences. That is, often the presence of what's in the second column above is enough to appropriately respond to the QUD. So Tatiana might say, yo me llamo Tatiana. It might just be, yo me llamo Tatiana. Or it'll be kind of somewhere in between those two things. And then one last note is that you'll also find that in many cases the focus element appears at the end of a sentence in Spanish, and this is because this is actually for complex syntactic reasons that you could get into in a syntax course or a linguistics course, but just keep in mind that sometimes that focus element will be coming at the end of a sentence. So our repaso, to review, questions under discussion divide the context set up into possibilities. Whenever we assert information, we are responding to a question under discussion. If the context set is not divided up into certain possibilities, an assertion will be irrelevant, that is, infelicitous. So if we make an assertion that isn't responding to a question under discussion, that assertion is irrelevant and that assertion is infelicitous. When a single element in a sentence is the response to a question under discussion, we place focus on that element. With explicit QUDs, we tend to just respond with that element. One-word responses, what's your name? James, for example. With implicit QUDs, we tend to put focus on an element, focus intonation on an element in a sentence. So if they would give my twin brother a name tag that says James on it, I might say, my name is James, to respond to the implicit question under discussion, whose name is James. In English, we tend to use almost exclusively intonation to convey focus, whereas in Spanish, in order to stress an element, it must be stressable. This causes a change in sentence structure and will add an element like a subject pronoun. Because we're adding elements to that sentence, Spanish speakers don't tend to rely as much on intonation to make this focus different.